Hello, I'm Dan Maher, former somebody, current nobody, and your host for this, the Convergence podcast. Now, some of you might remember last year's Convergence Showcase, which brought together content creators and indie developers to tell the world about dozens of very cool new games. Well, this year Convergence is back, and now it has a companion podcast. Each episode invites two notable members of the indie gaming community to talk about a specific theme in the hope of entertaining the casual listener and possibly enlightening other aspiring indie developers. For the first episode, we have a real treat for you as Alex Hutchinson of Raccoon Logic and Chris Gardiner of Failbetter Games meet for the very first time to talk about their respective approaches to narrative. Alex has been part of the industry for over 20 years and has some top-tier credits to his name, including lead designer at Maxis on games like The Sims 2 and Spore, and creative director at Ubisoft, where he oversaw Assassin's Creed 3 and Far Cry 4. Wishing to move away from the pressures of big studio development, Alex started Typhoon Studios in 2017, who revealed its very first game, Journey to the Savage Planet. Despite a positive critical and commercial reaction upon its 2020 release, Journey was to be Typhoon's only game, as their overlords, little startup called Google, decided to abandon its ill-fated, and some would say ill-managed, Stadia brand. Bruised but undeterred by the experience, Alex and other key members of Typhoon founded Raccoon Logic and successfully regained the rights to the Savage Planet IP. In May 2025, the comedic sci-fi co-op adventure Revenge of the Savage Planet released to critical acclaim, with players falling for its slapstick charm and satirical, scatological humour, not to mention its thinly veiled swipes at Raccoon's former employers. Chris has provided many of the beautifully written words for the various games in Failbetter's celebrated Fallen London franchise, including the aforementioned Fallen London, Sunless Sea, Sunless Skies, and Mask of the Rose. He's currently penning more no doubt wonderfully evocative prose for Failbetter's upcoming eldritch farming game Mandrake, a complete departure from Fallen London's Victorian Gothic world that, to the seeming chagrin of the hardcore fanbase, features absolutely no cannibalism. Shame that. The following conversation between Alex and Chris is everything I hoped this podcast would be. Two masters of their craft sharing stories and opinions while finding common ground and possibly even learning something themselves in the process. Over the course of an hour, we covered environmental versus prosaic storytelling, the increasing prevalence of lore, and the challenges of making genuinely funny games. To kick things off though, I asked them both which game most recently wowed them with its storytelling.
I'm playing Blueprints at the moment, and that's a fascinating sort of evolving narrative of, in that classic video game sense of you discovering it as you play and picking things up and turning things over. And I really like the fact that because I'm repeating it a lot, it actually sticks. I think one of the big problems in game narratives is that they sort of scoot past you and only 10% of your attention is on the story. 90% is on your hands and what you're doing. So the fact that I'm sort of not doing very much in Blueprints and wandering around sort of gluing it all together means I'm thinking about it a lot.
I think the last thing, I was going to say Citizen Sleeper 2, which I absolutely loved and was fantastic. But I think actually more recently I played Expedition 33, which is kind of a very linear narrative, but I can't think of many games that commit so hard to their narrative, like huge, ridiculous concepts that they just 100% commit to and dedicate themselves to and investigate is really, really satisfying. Yeah.
And you get to beat someone with a baguette. So
yeah, constantly. It is hard to think of a more French game. Every time I think they've achieved peak French, they get more French. Yeah.
I was going to say there's no wrong answers, but they were both the most correct answers. Blueprints for me, I think, is just one of the best examples of like narrative that can only be told in this medium. Like it's utterly remarkable, but less about that, more about you. So Alex, wanted to start with you. Obviously, your storied career is kind of very well known. Currently at Raccoon Logic, previously at Typhoon Studios. But there was a 5-year gap between that. We know what happened with Stadia. We know that story. But how was that time spent? As well as kind of acquiring the rights back to the Savage Planet franchise.
It was sort of, it's a strange time to be alive in the video game industry, as you sort of know, especially as sort of a double A developer. I hate that because it always implies quality, and I don't think that's really a nice way to think of it. But so trying to make small games, but not tiny games, has been really difficult. So we've spent sort of both the Typhoon years and the Raccoon Logic years sort of chasing money, basically. Like finding, we were with Microsoft briefly at Typhoon, and then we were at 505, and then we self-funded a little bit, and we self-funded this one. We were at Google in between, then we were at Tencent. So we've sort of been chasing what remains of that sort of mid-price budget a lot, which is, sort of more stressful than fun a lot of the time. But trying to keep doing that into the future is sort of what we've been doing. That took up a lot of the time, as well as obviously just making the game, the usual stuff.
Chris, conversely, you've kind of been in at Failbetter for what, nearly 15 years now. Starting as a staff writer. Yes,
Don't know that.
that's right. That's right. I checked your LinkedIn profile. Do you want to be precise? 14 years and 7 months. But but you're a narrative director now, and you built up from a staff writer role. I guess I had two questions, because there's not many times you look at a game studio and go, "There's a staff writer." I'm from a editorial background. I was a staff writer on a website. How does that translate at a game development studio, and what was that journey up to that narrative director role like?
I think we're also kind of in that kind of indie double A space, and I think we're at the much smaller end of it. So Failbetter has never been more than about 20 people. To an extent, it's just like being a staff writer and working. The jump is much smaller. Basically, it's not like I went from writing Barks to then suddenly having to narratively direct entire games. And the way that our games work is our writers get to do a lot of design and have a lot of control over the content that they're writing. We're quite privileged in that way. So it felt like a more gradual kind of gradual kind of increments of responsibility and stuff as time went on, really. Yeah.
Yeah, and I should say, like, we're 30 people, so I was gonna say it's not very small, but then it's sort of like half again. So it is, with economies of scale, it's not the 600 people on a team down the road at Ubisoft, but yeah, so it's still little. I think I like to call it the death seat, Chris, which is like,
Yeah.
like you can't fund it yourself, and it's when you go and talk to the big companies, they're like, "Can you do it for $50 million?" And you're like, "Absolutely not. No, that's a terrible idea."
Where does narrative figure in your development process, Alex? I mean, we've just heard from Chris that basically it's really built from the narrative up. To me, it feels with you, it's more about the sort of the play first and finding the seed of the game, and then building the narrative around that afterwards, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a lot. Hopefully, if it works, I really feel like you hit on the head when you mentioned blueprints, which is we're trying to make a narrative that can only be made in video games. We don't want to make a poor movie, and we don't want to make a poor TV show. So for me, it's almost question and response. So what can the player choose to do? What challenges do we put in front of them, which is a question, and then what's the player's answer, and then what does the game do with that to hopefully ask a new question? Is sort of the way we in our fantastical version we like to think about it. So it's about exploration, the game, which is where do you go, why would you go there, when you find something, what do you do with it, and then what does the game spit back, and then the rest is sort of world building to me, although that's a way overused term. So all the stupid ads and things are there to just sort of paint a portrait of the sort of crazy, awful future that you find yourself in, which we like to think of as an optimistic dystopia, like a bright, happy, like you're fucked, but you're still doing your best to have a good time. So those are the sort of two parts, I think, just sort of the world you sit in, and then what opportunities you get in the game.
But I think one of the really interesting things about the Savage Planet games is like how many places you find to put narrative and comedy in particular. Like every single thing in those games is funny, from the writing to the visuals to the gameplay to the animation, like the character animation and stuff.
Yeah, well, I think it's also like I don't like I feel that a lot of people coming up in the business thought that their favorite franchises, like Star Wars or whatever, had these beautiful Bibles written before they began. You know what I mean? With all the characters and all the backstory, and you're like, that's just absolute rubbish. You know what I mean? So we sort of build organically. So when we we had a fake soft drink, or food substance called grob, and then we needed bait in the game, and we're like, it should be grob, like throw the hands at the creatures, and then we had this idea for a meat buddy, which was just a parody ad, and then the idea that the meat buddy should be your co-op companion. You should print your buddy out of loose meat to play in the game. So hopefully, sort of glue it together without ever becoming too self-referential.
Is that flexibility that you've got there? Do you think that's a feature of being AA rather than triple?
Absolutely, and independent in that all these ideas. I think AAA shaves off the pointy ends, of everything, or the risky things. And when you can make the decision yourself, or if you can just keep it quiet, you can sort of sneak it through in the AA. It's not enough money for anyone to panic.
Yeah.
Alex, you said in an interview with Polygon where they were praising Revenge's physical comedy, and you said, like, for a game to be funny, the comedy needs to be in the gamepad, not the script. Where do you stand on that statement, Chris?
I guess that's typically
both.
we don't. Yeah,
Yeah, ideally. The comedy in our games is kind of often localized in the script. No, I guess, yeah, okay. So Sunless Skies and Sunless Skies, I guess, become comedies of kind of tragedy and error. Like, stuff starts to go wrong and mount up, and then you get another outbreak of cannibalism on your space train at exactly the wrong time, just when you're being chased by space bees and stuff. And I think then the kind of the disaster becomes comedy, the tragedy of it becomes comedy.
Systemic elements, they tend to be the funniest parts in games, don't they?
Yeah. I always say, like a one-liner is funny once, but kicking your friend off a cliff to his death is funny forever. Which is a bit of a corruption of the old Mel Brooks tragedy and comedy line, but made interactive.
Why do you think so many games struggle to be funny?
My personal opinion is they try to do it like other media. Like that's why they and I remember, this is a strange aside, but a guy, Hans Tenkate, who I work with at Maxis, was the president of the Monty Python Fan Club of America through like the 80s and 90s in this very strange thing. So he once met John Cleese, and he asked John Cleese, can games be funny? And John Cleese said no. And he said, why? And John Cleese said, because comedy is timing, and video games, you can't control timing. And I think that's really true, except if the player is telling the joke, and then they do control the timing. So when do you kick your friend, or when do you hit them, or when do you push them off the cliff? So I think as long as it's in the interactivity, then it's absolutely fine. But if you're trying to get a punchline just in, while your character's standing there, then it's not. Do it in a TV show or do it in a movie.
But I think there are also forms of comedy that don't rely on timing. Timing is vital for performance-based comedy. Like, if you've got an actor delivering lines, it's absolutely necessary. But you can get comedy in other ways as well. And one of the things I like about Savage Planet's comedy is the contrast between the manner in which your situation is being portrayed to you by the corporate talking heads and the actual reality that they are describing and trying to kind of gloss over and stuff. And that form of contrast, that doesn't rely on timing. That just relies on you seeing these things in contrast. And so in a lot of the Fallen Under games and Sunless Skies and everything, we get the contrast of ridiculous, bonkers, mad things happening, but filtered through this kind of Victorian morality or this Victorian approach to life, where the people are just trying to take this in their stride and be British about it, and there's nothing that a good cup of tea and a stiff upper lip can't fix and stuff. And there's just the contrast there that can make the funny.
Yeah, I think you're right, Chris. The sort of overlap between our games is the sense that the player is trying to survive in an absurd world. You know what I mean? And I think that's the sort of joy of it. And I think that's also easier to laugh along with as a player. You know what I mean? Like, I also think I've got sick of, and I try to avoid it forever, of telling stories or letting the player be the important person.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I like to. It happened obviously in Assassin's Creed, but that was, you're a secret important person at least. But usually you're just like a loser or someone who gets stuck. You know what I mean? Or gets, like in Far Cry, you're an idiot who turns up to bury their mother, quote unquote. When we know as the player, they just want to shoot guns and ride elephants. So,
Chris, your next game, Mandrake, it looks beautiful. It appears to be tapping into the love of cozy farming games, but there's definitely this sort of trademark Failbetter darkness underpinning it all. So why was this after Fallen and Sunless Skies? Why was this the one that you collectively chose to tackle next? And what is the Failbetter difference in that game?
We had a big process of talking as a company about what we wanted to do next, and what we had the skills and experience to do, what we wanted to do, what new skills we wanted to learn, and what places we wanted to push ourselves in. And frankly, what would be kind of commercially viable. If you're not thinking about that, you're going to get yourself in trouble very quickly, and you're probably not going to be able to finish the game. So we had big conversations about that, and we had a bunch of different kind of concepts for games suggested, and one of them was Eldritch Farming Sim, which our CEO Adam had suggested. And when he first kind of mentioned it to me, ages before we were talking about what game we wanted to actually make, I was saying, "Oh, surely there has to be a Fallen London game, right? Like farming in Fallen London, you've got weird Fallen London kind of monsters, and it's farming under the ground. We could make it really weird." And then he kind of explained the idea a bit more, and it became clear it wasn't going to fit in the Fallen London setting at all. It wasn't, for a start, it wasn't a fundamentally cynical game, and all the Fallen London games have this very strong streak of kind of cynicism running through them. And so we knew that was going to have to be we wanted it to be a different setting. We were also very ready to do a different setting. We've been doing this game for 15 years. We haven't been able to write about the sodding weather. Do you know how painful that is? Like not being able to talk about the weather at all, ever. It's infuriating. And we don't get to write about the natural world much. And so we wanted to kind of push all that stuff. And we were really attracted to the idea of a game where you were a little dude running around, and none of our games have had you be a little dude running around. And that is really powerful. Like it's so much easier to communicate to people what this game is and what you're doing in it when you're not an abstract space train or a collection of verbs and nouns.
But do you find that takes away, like what I love about Sunless Sea and that is like, I can imagine a lot of space. It's more like a book in that sense where there's a lot of taking place in my imagination. Once I'm a little person, then I'm that little person. Kind of like so. Yeah.
The big challenge of kind of working out how the narrative is going to work, and this is what I've been doing for the last few years, really, is trying to work out how we tell stories in this setting. And the big shock has been how constrained it is. Because yes, absolutely, in Fallen London or Sunless Skies, a lot of the writing happens when you dock at a port and you go into a prose thing. And then in that context, we have huge control over scene framing, where something happens, when it happens, what's going on during it, when it stops. And we don't have that in this game. We have fixed NPCs with schedules. So where they are and what they're doing is determined by when the player decides to talk.
And you also, and once you can see the character, you also have to pay for the scene.
Exactly. Yeah. Suddenly it becomes much more expensive. Yeah, here's me writing stuff about, the smith is kind of hammering and doing this and that. And then suddenly, well, actually, we can see what the smith's doing. They're not doing that right now. Yeah, it all gets more expensive suddenly. And the other big thing we were shocked that really kind of hit us and was a big obstacle was stakes, because this is the same constraints thing, the cost thing, that lots of we can't invent a character in a scene and bump them off now. We've got a fixed number of characters. They all have unique art. They all have their own animations. They have their own models, their own schedules. They perform important kind of gameplay functions. We can't just bump people off or have them leave or whatever. So we've got to work out how to make the stakes for all these character stories intensely kind of personal and still affecting. So it's been a huge change. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one solution I had to the same problem I mentioned is as I want the player to be in the game, not the character. I'm not a fan also of inhabiting a character. I want him to be sort of you, so I don't let them talk, as much as possible. So whether it's most of the time, so then that seems to help.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Don't let them say, because they say something that you don't agree with. Suddenly they're a character, they're not you.
We have a balanced meta. We have a lot of players who like to inhabit a character, but we also have this thing of this kind of playful relationship with the player where we're kind of trying to offer them incredibly bad decisions and seeing if they'll go along with them. We're in this kind of game of chicken with them, and that is a player thing, not a character thing.
Yeah, that's great. Savage Planet, it leans on the recorded video, environmental storytelling to communicate narrative, Fallen London, etc. I mean, even looking at Mandrake, there's still a lot of text-based world building in that. Is there interest on either side in sort of exploring those other avenues of storytelling? Is there more environmental storytelling in Mandrake, for example, with everything you've just sort of referred to?
Yeah, there is definitely. The thing that I'm really envious of Savage Planet is so much kind of spoken delivered dialogue, and with the probes that follow you around and constantly kind of commentate on what's going on. That's such a powerful tool, and we hadn't done anything with recorded dialogue before, but just recently we did the trailer for Mandrake, and we had an actual proper voice actor actually kind of read the little thing out, and it was like, oh man, this is really powerful. Like this is so good.
Although we get like it's very polarizing. Like we get some people who are like, that's why we added the option in both games to turn her off or make her less talkative and tough. Yeah, some people love it, and other people like, she won't stop talking. Why does she go on and on and on? And I tried to make it a little bit this one. You can switch the voice between a sort of, a male and female, or, two different style voices to add some variety, but it's tough. But I have a great fantasy of one day making a text adventure and just doing like Zork Zero, basically, like something like that, like those old games.
Yeah.
Mostly because I find, collaboration over long periods is so difficult. And I have this fantasy that you could shrink that team down to like 2 people, and that, that might be fabulous just for a moment, and then probably terribly constraining, and I'd come running back. But it'll be fun for a couple of weeks.
Like Revenge's story, to me, knowing the history with Stadia and things like that, there was an element of it that to me felt like it was quite an exercise in catharsis for you as well. Would you agree with that? Do you feel like it's out of your system now? You're like, where do we go from here?
We were very upset. We were not happy boys and girls. It was a deeply unpleasant experience, and we already had this idea of, obviously that you're in a corporate dystopia in the first game, and then we're like, well, we just lived a version that seems even worse than the other one, because at least you had a job, the first one, on the alien planet. So we're out there on the street, sort of shoebox in hand, and it just seemed to sort of work. And I sort of kept the frame of the game loose. And then we just stuck revenge in there, almost like Revenge of the Jedi, you know what I mean? Of like, we just put it in like as a cheesy thing. And I was like, oh, maybe it is about revenge. And, it's a fun, sort of fortuitous, accidental collisions of things. And then it just been like, all right, let's just make Alta a version of Google. And, and so for a while I was writing only things that they'd said to me. and that was cathartic. But then we had to go a little bit further, but not as far as you might think. some of this stuff. So that was good. I think it's out now. I think it's done. So yeah. So like, we're definitely in the mood to try something new. But it's a great time to be launching new IPs. I've heard. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. People are
so much money just sloshing around.
Exactly. You can't get out of its way.
Yeah.
But no. So we're still figuring out what we're going to do next at all at the moment. So we've got a roadmap for the rest of the year for Revenge to finish it up. And support and try and grow sales, basically, to stay in business, and then we'll figure out what's next.
Failbetter Games obviously consistently praised for their writing, which you play a huge part of, Chris. What was the origins of the studio's sort of focus on bringing great prose to the medium as like the Failbetter trademark, and like what other writers and studios in the interactive space prior to that really influenced that approach?
I think originally it was partly constraints, like the original Failbetter people were a writer and an artist, so those were the skills that they had. The artist was then a budding artist. That wasn't Paul's background at all, and he basically self-taught himself to become this incredible artist through working for Failbetter. But occasionally we'll come across like a really old piece of art he did in Fallen London, still used on some ancient bit of content, and he's like, oh Jesus, is that still in the game? I've got to redraw that, give me some time in the sprint. Another kind of inspirations came from all over. There was a lot of interactive fiction was a huge huge source of inspiration, and Anthropy and Emily Shorts and all the other great creators that have worked in that space. And beyond that, like now I feel a lot of our inspiration comes from good writing that's not in video games as well. And we talk a lot about books that we've read and the things that appeal to us in those books. And even though in Mandrake, a lot of those lessons can't just be carried over. It's not a prose work like some of our other games are. And that's still like, if you want to see close examination of interpersonal relationships, books are a very good place to go. The other good places to go are like soaps or long-running kind of no science fiction, no weirdness TV shows. So yeah, we're getting a lot of inspiration from that kind of stuff.
EastEnders,
yeah. I learned a lot from EastEnders. I learned a huge amount from British sitcoms and Only Fools and Horses and stuff like that, because every episode of a sitcom has to be based entirely upon its characters. and it has to be immaculately paced with kind of what in games we would call lore, but what is revealed and when and how, and it's got to be like the right stuff's got to be held back and revealed at exactly the right moment and stuff. And that immaculate structure has become a big inspiration for us. Yeah.
Do you think it's actually, just side note, maybe this is off topic, Dan, but watching things like new TV shows where they can rely on you having access to the old episodes, seems like things are getting very complex very fast. In the old days, it's sort of like you had to be aware that it was a Wednesday and I got sick and I missed the whole episode. So yeah, I can't be lost to next week in Doctor Who or in EastEnders or Neighbours or whatever it is. But now the expectation is go back and watch it, you know what I mean, or catch up. And so the density of required memory and institutional memory and understanding seems to be way heavier.
I think you're right. And you can see in older TV shows, there's like early scenes that reestablish the fundamentals of every character.
Repeat the plot.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And set it up. And also a modern TV show now, when you start a new series of it, they won't recap the previous series of things. And like, if it's been like a year or two since you watched the previous season, be like, what the hell are we, what is happening here? Where do we go? We recently, my family recently watched and rewatched Lost. It's a fascinating, kind of incredibly influential show for many reasons, but it was fascinating to see, very ahead of its time. It's fascinating to see how much better it works in a binged format than in a weekly format, where we're not having to remember things from 4 or 5 years ago. We have to remember things from a couple of months ago. And the time that's unfolding for the characters, which the whole series takes over like 100 days or so, with a couple of big time skips in it. But if you were a viewer, that was 6-7 years of time. Like the fundamental experience of the viewer and the characters were totally out of sync, and I think caused a lot of the kind of reason that viewers kind of struggled with some.
Strangely, my family and I rewatched a big chunk of Lost in the last like 2 months as well. I don't know why. Like my daughter's 6 and she's sort of into weird stuff and she likes Alien, but so she watched it. But I thought what struck me was, how did anyone not think that this was a mystical purgatory style thing from the start? They seem to be flagging it every episode, like in the first season. You know what I mean? I was like, he follows his dead dads into the forest and finds an empty coffin, and then people just appear and disappear. Anyway, I guess people weren't used to it, but it's very funny.
The audience wanted a completely different show than they were being given, and I think the show they were being given was drastically better than the show they wanted. But yeah.
So referring to lore, I mean, where do you stand on the kind of increasing prevalence of it? It feels like I watched the Nintendo Direct about Donkey Kong Bonanza recently. Aside from the fact it looks fantastic, a young version of Pauline, the sort of damsel in distress from Donkey Kong.
Diddy Kong, Donkey Kong, and Bruce. You know what I mean? Pauline. God's sakes. It's just someone, it must be in Japanese, it must sound like they're related somehow. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, Pauline-san. They're like, no, Pauline? Why does she have a real name?
Well, she shows up as a little girl and people are like, how can that be that? And people are obsessing over the lore in a Donkey Kong game. Like,
it's wrong.
Where does it end?
Well, it's foolish. It used to be. I think that's one of the reasons Nintendo has such success. Is it doesn't have lore. It just is. It has kind of like a structure, and it has a feeling and a mood and an emotion. But I was really put off by the talking in Mario Brothers Wonder. Super Mario Wonder. The little things that talk you with actual voice. Yeah, and I'm like, no, this is not right. Like I was hunting through the menus trying to turn it off. But I find it strange, and I think it's very dangerous too, because on Assassin's Creed, when we did 3, which was meant to be the 3rd one, and ended up being the 5th one because of the money. Yeah. I realized that we had this ongoing story, to your point, Chris, where at that point we were going to ask people to remember stories from 7 years ago to include in the present day storyline in that game. And it didn't make sense to me that you could have been in primary school and you're now in college, and I'm saying, remember in primary school when this happened? It's just not gonna happen, which is why we killed Desmond in the end. I was like, we'll take the bullet for this. They killed Desmond. He's got to go. He really did. Because the original idea for the game was that there was going to be, the Altair, then Ezio one game, then a present day Desmond game, and that's it.
Right. Wow.
And that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Until it's very successful, and now you're going to go on forever. And so everything's being retrofit. So I was like trying to give a nod to that and just like at least wrap it up roughly the way it was meant to be wrapped up. and then we can open the door to the future, which I think works, but it meant that we had some people complaining about killing old poor Desmond. But too much lore is becomes a weight, and I think you're seeing it in the Marvel movies now, where it's the same thing happened in the comics. It's really exciting to see all the connections, and it builds up when it's a normal amount, and when it's a huge amount, and you need to remember TV shows and movies and all this sort of stuff for 10 years, then people start leaving the franchise, and you're only left with the hardest of hardcore fans, and they're mean, horrible people. And they will yell at you, and it's what killed RTS games with complexity, not lore. But like all this craft builds up, and then there's things you can't do and things that you must do, and normal people just it's very confusing, and they're all dressed funny, and they just leave.
The fighting game scene is very similar as well.
I can't believe they go in lore in fighting games. That melts my brain.
So I think there's context. There's games that just don't need it, and there's media that just doesn't need it, and it is fine for a thing to be standalone. Like, not everything has to be a huge interconnected universe, whatever. But as someone who's writing a game that's 15 years old and is now more than 4 million words, like I'm pro lore in the right when it gets it's like that, and I don't mind. One of the things I liked about Marvel when I was into the comics, both as a kid and then when I got back into them and as an adult, was the sense that the world was bigger than you quite understood, and sometimes something would be happening and you're like, what the Jesus is happening over there, what am I missing, and stuff. And when it's done well, that's quite satisfying, and when it's done badly, it's absolutely infuriating. But I guess my background is kind of in history, and you can never know all the lore of history. It's all just this huge mess of crap happening to everyone all at the same time. I like that sense of what's going on.
No, I think you're right. The vibe is good. I think maybe where I had started to get a problem, because I was a huge comic book fan as well. And then, when you discover them, you're like, oh, they all exist in the same unit. That's amazing. And then, there's other things, like you said, that you don't understand. But then when you start expecting it to fit together properly, I got super frustrated. I'm like, wait, they're not even there. I'm reading 17 comic books, and 5 of them are contradicting the other 5. And so they raised my expectations too high. Yeah. But in the Marvel movies, because they had Fahey running the whole thing right up until the end game, it all did fit together for once, because he was able to say, no, you can't have that character. Yes, you're almost like the X-Men when Chris Claremont was writing it. You know what I mean? He was running that entire universe of mutants, and so he could make it work. And then it just sort of starts to go pop now, and I'm curious to see if they can keep it together. And also, we're stuck with all the D-grade characters now too.
There's commercial pressures that come in as well. Like we're talking about Lost, and partway through season 1 of Lost was originally meant to be 3 seasons, and partway through season 1, the writers were told, you are going to be writing this forever. I have 20 million viewers. keep it going.
Bring in a smoke monster. You can figure out what it is later. But it's just smoke. Anything.
And Marvel, when Marvel's publishing 80 to 100 books a month, Jesus, you can't keep it all up. And the same with, I think, the way they expanded the MCU, they expanded into television stuff. There's so much more stuff all of a sudden. There is a breaking point. And Fallen London, despite its kind of size, is a small dedicated team that work on it at a fairly consistent rate.
You're the Marvel bullpen. You still have the bullpen.
Yeah, basically.
And I think you're right. And then when it's small, and I think that was a whole other podcast, but the destructiveness of popularity on cool things is kind of sad. Like, the exact moment you get more of what you want and then it sort of kills it is mildly depressing.
Yeah, you understand why they have these resets like the New 52 and things, because eventually you write yourselves into a corner, or you write yourself into a space where it's so expansive and the possibilities are so many that you just go, come on, can we just start again?
Let's just do it. And I think there's always a fantasy. You were mentioning history, Chris, of but you can make sense of it.
Yeah,
you can. And so Grant Morrison tried to do it with New 52 with other people, and Scott Snyder's doing it with All In, trying to do it with All In at the moment in DC. Someone, they're like, no, I can do it. It's sort of like this Sisyphean, goal, and they get it all the way to the top of the mountain, and then the law just rolls back down to all the side.
I think the film should start having the editor's notes, see issue 234 of Fantastic Four, etc. Yeah.
It's fascinating seeing, though, the effect of the expectations of law on player bases stuff as well now. And there is an expectation for things to be part of some big world or whatever. And it's fascinating seeing it on games that intentionally play with ambiguity, like FromSoft games, which now have a huge dedicated lore community, which I'm obsessed with, and I will happily. I spent in my stupidest purchase of my entire life, I think, £250 on a really fancy book of Elden Ring lore. It's like the most beautiful book I own.
I think I saw that go past me on like a Kickstarter or something.
Ridiculous. It's got shiny gold edges. It's embossed. It's incredible. It's an amazing physical object. But there's like just analyzing the lore of these games is itself I was going to say a cottage industry, but it's like bigger than a cottage industry. It's a whole thing, and I think that's interesting because we know that the way developers in general, but especially like FromSoft, develop their games isn't compatible with there being a single perfect answer for everything. They iterate constantly. They throw things out. They bring in new stuff. They say, "Oh, this guy doesn't work for them anymore. He works for this." They change the stories drastically.
Yep, it reminds me more of reminds me more of the fun periods of fandom. And maybe this is just rose-colored glasses, and I was young, but when you couldn't get access to most stuff.
Yeah.
So if someone had seen a video, or someone had, like a video, or they taped the Star Wars Christmas special off the TV, and they could show you, like, doesn't exist. You're like, oh my God, it does. What the hell is this? Like all those sorts of bits and pieces sort of more fun. Whereas now you can sort of collate it. And worse, I had this nightmare the other day if someone's going to just ask the AIs for the lore.
That's going to be awful. Like,
and it's just going to laugh out something filled with errors and gibberish. But it's going to look complete and sound complete, and it'll be instantly 100,000 words long. So I'm like, oh, that's a great future.
That's actually what I was going to ask Chris. Is like, when you're running a game, when you're writing for a game for that long, how do you stop the lore overtaking storytelling? Because I feel that's what's happened in things like the Marvel universe.
Does it become a burden?
I mean, I guess we don't. I was gonna say we don't plan ahead. We do plan ahead. That sounds really bad. We don't have like an ending to Fallen London that we're working towards or anything. We're not trying to engineer things towards this big final showdown. So for us, the lore isn't about like adding new stuff and necessarily adding tons of new characters and adding new kind of world menacing threats, each bigger than the last or anything like that. It's going deeper into the things we've already established. And I think we've got multiple historians that work on Fallen London. This is just like part of how history works. The closer you look at it, the more there is. Whatever tiny bit you look at, the closer you get in, the more of it you'll see. And that's the kind of approach that we have. Rather than add more quantity of stuff, we add more depth of stuff or nuances to stuff, or what different angles can we take on this thing we've already established? How might that interact with this other thing we've already established? So we try to make it richer rather than bigger, I think.
And when you're writing for games when you've got a word count in excess of 4 million, words, this is in excess of even the chunkiest of fantasy novels. Like it's a multi-part question, really. How is that effort divided? How much of it is written in isolation versus, in that bullpen? And how do you ultimately sort of review it for consistency in terms of the style, the continuity, the quality? And on top of all that, how do you avoid burnout?
So we have a small in-house team, and then we have a number of freelancers, excellent freelancers that we also use. And but the way that Fallen London is structured is, it is possible to say, I'm going to write this monthly story for subscribers, or I'm going to write this big player event that's happening this summer, and for a writer to kind of take responsibility for that and do practically the whole thing. And other writers will hear the pitch stage and provide feedback and input on that. Another writer will provide edits, and provide QA and everything. So there is collaboration and stuff in there, but there's a lot of ownership to it.
That's interesting. That's kind of the way. Sorry, that Ubisoft is able to make big games in that you give ownership.
Right.
There's a huge company, but each team is its own little island.
Gotcha.
That has a huge amount of ownership. So I just thought that was interesting. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go on, Chris.
Because we tend to write in chunks of content, we don't try and like fit those into a huge great thing. We don't have an MCU phase 4 or whatever going on. There's this bit of content, and then there's this bit of content, and then there's this, and cumulatively they add up to kind of a big, chunky, satisfying world. But individually, they work as their own stories as well. Regarding burnout, I think that's hard. I don't know. I think for me, I felt that it's just such a huge setting that you can always find different bits of it that interest you. So I think one of the fruitful things we do is move around different bits of the setting, and I've done a whole bunch of stuff about weird eldritch things. Now I want to write something about kind of Victorian manners, or I want to write a spooky romance or something, and trying to change it up within that. And our world is big enough to allow that, fortunately.
Alex, in my sort of earlier years, I used to visit quite a lot of big studios. And with that
years.
In the good years, yeah. The less wrinkly years. I was shocked, actually, when I went to AAA Studios and spoke to the narrative designers about which way round it was done effectively. You know, they basically build an entire game, put some missions together, and then go, hey, make this make sense. Like afterwards.
Yeah.
Was that kind of your experience of the system? And which major studios do you think are, I guess, reversing that and are providing successful examples of storytelling?
I think it depends what is primary in the game. You know, so some like the AC games were always pretty story heavy first. You know what I mean? Because we had the historical setting, and that led to the character. You were going to be playing in a situation that existed, that we were going to insert our nonsense, and then it would be like, what events should you come across, what makes sense to come across, and we didn't. One of the early rules, I don't know, I haven't been able to play them since I left, but one of the early rules was you don't change history, right? So you can be there and you can do something behind the scenes, but it makes no sense. If I can Google that this didn't happen or in 30 seconds, then it's boring, and it sort of betrays the sort of suspension of disbelief. But so it was based a lot on historical events, and we'd weave our sort of narrative through. So it had to be quite story heavy at the start. Whereas a lot of other games, I feel like the narrative, and I know Uncharted and especially would start with the events, and then they would put the story on top, you know what I mean, at the sort of the last minute. But that makes sense because it's kind of like a set piece spectacle game. And so for me with Far Cry, that whole game Far Cry 4 was a game, a joke about whether in this kind of game you're here for the narrative or not. Right. So like people would always say, well, why am I here? I'm here to bury my dead mother. And I'm like, no, like I said before, you're absolutely not. This is rubbish. So that's why the game opens with a joke. I was like, the only place I can prove you wrong is in the first cutscene, where I'll honestly tell you, wait here, and I will fly you in a helicopter to bury your mother. And then that can be done. Just wait 5 minutes, essentially. Because after that, you'll know the cutscenes, the characters aren't telling you the truth, you know what I mean? So in the first one, and that's what happens. Like if you stay there, Pagan Min comes back in, he goes, oh my God, I can't believe you're here. And he puts you in a helicopter, and you go to the mountain, you bury your mother, and they roll the credits, and you didn't have to murder anybody, at all. But in actual fact, everybody wanted to murder people. The first time they see a gun, they pick it up and start shooting people. So it just made me laugh to go, oh, all right, tell me how important you think the story is in this game. And immediately watch everyone kick open the first door and start firing a machine gun at complete strangers, in a country they'd never visited. So that made me laugh anyway. So I think it depends on the project and the team as well, and who you have. I think Chris mentioned this. Sometimes you have really great writers, you know what I mean? And you're like, they should be driving this because they're awesome. You know what I mean? And sometimes you're like, these people, it's not going to come together. It should be driven by the pad, or, my personal preference, which is I want the player telling their own story. So, I think it's horses for courses.
To what extent with Mandrake do you think players are going to have control over their stories? Is there any intention to afford a bit more freedom in that regard, because there's much more of a character-led focus?
Yeah, we've got a balancing act to pull off here, and we're in the process of working out how that's gonna how that's actually going to be implemented. But there is a kind of specific story to it. But the expectation with these games is not that once you finish a story, the credits roll and then you can't play anymore. The expectation is that you keep going as long as you want, and as much you want, and that you control who you decide who you talk to, and so how fast you advance the story and everything. So that's what we're trying to balance in this. It's not so much we want a story, that's what we're known for, that's what we're good at. We want multiple stories, in fact, but we've got to balance that with letting the player choose which ones they want to pursue them, how they want to pursue them, and then not saying that's going to shut stuff off to you when you're done with it, or when you hit certain thresholds or whatever. Yeah.
Well, gents, we are almost at the end of time, so I just need to ask you the 3 questions of doom. The first of which, we'll start with the negative and we'll work our way up to the positive, right? So the first one is industry horror stories. Have either of you, I mean, I'm sure Alex has got a few to share. But
turn off my microphone. I see the office lawyer standing up at the back.
His spidey sense just like tingling. He's just like,
it just comes up over the monitor.
All right, but which ones are you legally, or even if it's just things like a slightly dafter, I'd say.
I'll tell the first story. The first time I ever came to America was to demo a game I was making for a very small studio in Australia called Taurus Games, and we foolishly pitched a PlayStation 2 launch title, having not worked on anything but Game Boys, basically. And, we thought we could do it for $1 million. And obviously, this is one of the 2 projects that never, ever saw the light of day that I worked on. And we were with BAM Entertainment. I don't know if you remember them, but they were a terrible movie, and they just exploded. They literally went BAM, and everyone lost their shirts and the whole thing. So anyway, so I'm down there, and we had this really shitty sort of first-person shooter game, which was originally based on a movie called The Recruit, and we'd moved over to something else. It was all the bad things. We're in the room, and I get to Sony. We'd worked for like 50 days straight in Foster City, and I'm like, amazing America. This is like early 20s. And they usher me to the room to demo to the Sony people. And as I walk in, a Sony rep takes me aside, and he says, "Hey, just so you know, we've decided as a company to never approve any BAM Entertainment game for publication on our platform."
Oh my God.
And then he goes, "But anyway, good luck presentation." So I was like, I'm standing there, I'm a kid, basically, and I've worked a lot, and I thought we had a chance, and we've just been told there's no chance. So anyway, I was like, all right. So I got there, and I had to do an hour presentation to like Sony, our stuff, and they're told there's just no chance. And they were very nice. And right at the end, any questions? No questions. They all got up, said thank you very much, and exited the room.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, at least, so then I just had to move to America. That was the point. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to go where the games get published. So then I moved.
How about you, Chris? Have you had any?
Yeah, I mean, the horror stories in this industry are so horrible, you just don't want to talk about them.
But think of this as like a sort of a group therapy.
Yeah. I have there's one I'd really like to talk about. Can I talk about this old NDA that I don't know? I'll talk about a different one, which was quite kind of similar to Alex's, but it was back when Failbetter did client work. We'd been working on this game for a client, and we were quite a long way through. We'd gone through all the approvals and everything. We'd gone through multiple milestones. Everything had passed the milestones. It was all looking good. And we had another milestone coming up, and we went to that milestone. And between that one and the previous one, the person at the client company who had commissioned the game had left, and a new person had come in. So the new person had ended up with this weird fucking Failbetter nonsense thing on the desk, and obviously gone, what the hell is this? And just didn't want it and wasn't happy with it, and said, yeah, we're thinking of canning it. And we'd made it as this kind of sort of open worldy, very exploratory, very weird thing, which is what we were kind of known for at the time. And they didn't want that at all. And they basically said, yeah, we're thinking about canning this. We're going to talk about it with our higher ups later this afternoon. So that lunchtime, that afternoon, my writing partner and I had to go away and literally rewrite a pitch for the entire game, making it from an open world thing into a linear kind of a linear, straightforward, very simply kind of traditional narrative game within that afternoon, without any changes that would mandate rewriting stuff or new assets or anything like that. And we did it, but it was a very exciting afternoon, and it was still, at that point, it's not landing on kind of happy ears and stuff like
the. Did you do it in the pub at least?
No, we didn't. We were working remotely. We were tiny rooms.
Terrible. It's terrible.
All right, so moving into this more positive now, the one that we call the thrill of the new. What does it take for a new game to excite you? And is there anything on the horizon that's kind of prompted that feeling? Something you've gone, I've not seen that before. I'm really, really keen to try that out.
I'm into verbs. So like the idea, any game where I can see an action, where the button press makes something happen that hasn't happened before. So I haven't seen much. I think we're getting into sort of a consolidation phase where, there's been so many cool indies and, so many cool AAAs and AAs, hopefully, that we've found most of the verbs. So it's more the collisions then I'm interested in. So I forget, I'm going to lose the name, but there was every pixel matters sort of pixel game where there were properties on every pixel, so they could melt or burn or all that sort of stuff. And it was a 2D. Anyway, that I forget. I'm losing a pitch for them, but
I've got it. Begins with an N, right?
I think so, but it was the idea that all of the world, your actions could melt the world or freeze the world or move everything around. It felt very dynamic and very
Noita.
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, and that was really cool. And so things like that excite me, but there's not much at the moment. We just finished. We were very heads down for the last few months, so I'm only coming back up for air now.
How about you, Chris?
It's turning into a combination of things that excite me about a game now. The first one is stupid, but it's that it's short. Like, I really like short games because you can finish them. That's really good. And like, I put 250 hours in the last couple of years into Elden Ring and its expansion. I put another 100 hours into Star Wars Outlaws and stuff. Like, I really like shorter games that I can finish in 5, 10, 15 hours. Those are lovely. Those are brilliant. I like games that commit themselves to their world. They know what they're doing. They know what kind of tone they're going for, and they just go for it 100%, exactly like the Savage Planet games do. And I like games that have an opinion. It's quite hard for me to get into kind of generic sci-fi or generic fantasy these days. But if it's got an angle on that, if it's like folkloric fantasy or horror sci-fi or something, or kind of working class sci-fi or something, like Citizen Sleeper does, that stuff I can get excited about. Just a different lens onto it.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It reminds me, I don't know, something else I enjoyed recently, which was Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. And it's kind of a busted game in a lot of ways, but it's kind of magical in other ways. It reminds me of like when I played Daggerfall, of like when, you could see the little text pop up and it would say, Lord Schlimmelblomf has been promoted to this. And I'm like, what the and it's a bit like you also mentioned, Chris, where it felt like the world was big and I was in a thing that was happening. I don't know if that mattered at all, but like in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, where I took off my pants in the middle of town to put on better pants because that's how it works. And then a guard came past and went, ooh, and put on my old pants. And I was like, this is gaming. You know what I mean? He stole us. Yeah, it's frick pants. And although probably funnier in speaking to British people because you say pants for underpants, but so I probably told a story I wasn't telling. But yeah, I thought that was magical, like those systemic little clockworky things. And again, as you mentioned, the things that can't happen in a book. You know what I mean? They're surprising, the minor and the smaller moments and smaller games and tinier things. I agree with you, is where the fun is.
Yeah, I was fully expecting that to end with, and I was arrested for public indecent.
Yeah, that would have been amazing. And now I'm thrown in jail and I have to stay there.
Yeah, I love games that make me stay in jail. That's the other one. Like even if it just shows the clock going, it's like sit in it.
And finally, we have the Convergence Indie Hall of Games. So what is an all-time great indie game that you both think should be inducted into the hall?
I'm going to cheat a little because if we go back in time, what is indie? I don't even know anyway backside. But I think out of all of the bizarre things I played over years, that an old game, the Addams Family platformer on the Amiga 500, was one of the best things ever. And it was like a non-linear platformer in like 93, and I wrote an article for a while ago about it. But like, you start in the house and I can go through the doors and I can go into any level in any order and I can go in both directions usually in that. For me, it was sort of mind expanding. And it's essentially Fez before Fez, in my opinion. It's the same thing. And they did it with a license, a shitty license that you look at and you're like, Addams Family, like everything good about the Addams Family is inapplicable to video games. So I was very impressed. I loved it. I bought it for £50 from England. Had to be shipped out. Took 4 months to arrive in Australia.
Oh my God.
Time. So the level of, you imagine now they can't, it's a 2-hour download. They'll lose their mind. I had to wait 4 goddamn months to get the crushed box, in the mail. And £50 was like 120 Australian dollars at the time or something crazy like that. But luckily it was very, very good.
I remember it well. Was it you played like a sort of super deformed Gomez?
Yeah.
And it was made by Ocean, right?
Yes, it was all the things that shouldn't exist, and you saved all the members of the family, and the central room in the house was Lurch at the piano. And when you first go in, he's going glunk, glunk, and then as each person you rescue, they start to play the theme. So in the end, you put them together, and each character represents an instrument, and it was just great. It was just really
so good.
Yeah, it's really good. It's still it's still fun now. It still plays well today.
Yeah, Ocean was on a weird streak of taking very bizarre film licenses and making Amiga games out of them. They did Nightbreed, the Clive Barker one. They did 2 of those. They did a really good Polygon RoboCop 3.
Yeah.
Do you remember that around that era?
There's also some weird stuff. Like, do you remember the Frankie Goes to Hollywood game?
I do.
64.
I had it on the Spectrum.
Yeah, and it came with a tape. Came with a tape of the song. And Chip Chin's. Anyway, this is what I love. So that's, in our own little way, trying to do a bit of that. Have some game you stumble across and people go, well, that's really strange. You know what I mean? Like a Whizball or a WizKid or something from Sensible. These are the good things.
Cool. And Chris, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agonized over this one. I think in the end, I'm gonna, and it's hard to pick one, but I'm gonna pick one recent one just because that means like someone might get some money.
It might get $1. Stay in business.
There's a game that came out recently called Road Warden, which is it's like an incredibly intricate interactive fiction game. It's mostly text, but it has kind of pixelated maps and illustrations that you play. And it's this great. It's one of the things that feels most like a tabletop role playing game being put onto a screen. And it's set in a fantasy world, but it's a very low kind of. It's a very grimy, gritty, low magic fantasy world. You're a road warden sent to this a kind of isolated peninsula where your job is to basically carry messages between the tiny fly speck settlements that hang out there. And there's all sort of political stuff going on with these big kind of neighbors that are trying to kind of muscle in and exploit it. There's all these weird isolated settlements there you get to interact with. There's too much going on for you to explore it in one playthrough. So there's always this sense of what might have been, which I absolutely love in games when you don't know where the edges are, and there's still this sense of possibility to them. It's really well written. It's a really interesting world. It's really, really satisfying. Yeah, I really enjoy it. I still haven't finished it, but I'm having a great time playing it.
Brilliant, Chris. This is Road Warden. Is this the one by Moral Anxiety Studio?
That sounds right.
I will try and endeavour to add a link to the episode description so that you can find that. It's currently £2.90 on Steam. So
that's ridiculous.
If this episode comes out while the sale's still on, grab that. And if I can, I will always also try and find a video of that Addams Family game.
Yes,
Yeah,
I think there's a few long plays as well. I think I've seen them bouncing around.
A massive thank you to Alex and Chris, both for agreeing to participate and obviously for being such fantastic guests. Revenge of the Savage Planet is available right now on PC, Xbox Series consoles, and PlayStations 4 and 5, while Failbetter's latest venture, Mandrake, can be wishlisted on Steam. If you want to follow them on socials, join their communities, or for whatever reason, watch a 90-minute playthrough of unexpected Hall of Game inductee The Addams Family, then check the episode description for all the details. There, you'll also find details about the next Convergence Showcase, currently scheduled for the 18th of September. And that's the end of the very first episode of the Convergence podcast. We've got some more episodes in the can already, so please subscribe so you're first to know when they launch. Until then, however, thanks so much for listening and possibly watching too. Bye.